The night air was heavy with rain and the city lights blurred behind the droplets running down the window. Somewhere deep within those glowing towers, a young man named Arjun stared at the streets below, his reflection shimmering on the glass. He wasn't just any man, he was the son of one of the city's wealthiest landlords. But tonight, for the first time, he didn't feel rich. He felt empty. Arjun had grown up surrounded by everything money could buy: cars that cost more than some people's lifetime savings, clothes tailored from Europe, and a mansion so big he often got lost in it. Yet he always wondered one thing: were people kind because of who he was or what he had? His father, Mr. Rajiv Malhotra, owned over 50 buildings across the city. Every tenant, every family paying rent bowed when they saw him. But Arjun had seen something dark behind those polite smiles: fear, resentment, and fake respect. And deep down, he hated it. It started one afternoon when Arjun overheard his father scolding an old tenant. The man had fallen behind on rent after his wife's illness. Instead of compassion, Arjun heard only cold numbers and deadlines. The old man's trembling voice echoed in Arjun's mind long after he left the room. That night, something broke inside him. He wanted to know what it was like to live among those people, to feel what they felt. But more than that, he wanted to know if goodness still existed when money disappeared from the equation. So without telling anyone, Arjun came up with a plan. The next morning, he went to a small, worn-out apartment building on the city's outskirts, one his father owned but rarely visited. Its paint was peeling, the elevator barely worked, and the air smelled faintly of dampness and despair. He walked to the manager's office, a cluttered little room where papers piled higher than cents. A middle-aged man with sharp eyes looked up. "Yes, you looking for someone?" Arjun took a breath and said softly, "I'm looking for a room, something cheap." The manager laughed dryly. "You sure you can handle this place, kid? Not exactly luxury living here." Arjun smiled faintly. "That's fine, I just need a place to stay." He used a fake name, Arun Sharma. No one would connect him to the Malhotra empire. He signed the rental form with trembling hands, knowing this was the first time he was truly stepping out of his world. His new apartment was small, just one room, a cracked mirror, and a squeaky fan that made more noise than wind. The walls were stained with old memories, and the window looked out at a narrow alley filled with garbage bins and stray cats. But Arjun smiled. It was perfect. That first night, he sat on the floor eating instant noodles, the kind he'd never touched before, and listened to the laughter coming from the neighboring room. It was the laughter of a family that had little but shared everything. Days passed and he began meeting his neighbors. There was Mira, a young woman in her 20s, always running late, juggling 2 jobs to support her younger brother. She smiled easily even when her eyes looked tired. Then there was Mr. D'Souza, an old retired teacher who told stories to the children in the building. And Rafik, the auto driver who'd lost his leg in an accident but still managed to find humor in every bad day. They didn't know who he really was, they just saw another struggling tenant, quiet, polite, and maybe a little lost. And for the first time, Arjun felt seen. But the real test began when the rent collector arrived. Every month, the tenants dreaded his knock, a sharp, impatient sound that made hearts race. His name was Prakash and he worked directly for Arjun's father. He had a reputation for being ruthless. That morning, Arjun watched from his doorway as Prakash shouted at an old lady who'd missed her payment by 3 days. The woman begged for more time, her voice breaking, but Prakash just smirked and said, "Rules are rules, pay or get out." Arjun's fists clenched. He wanted to scream, to tell the man to stop, but he couldn't blow his cover. So he simply stepped forward and said, "Sir, maybe she can pay next week. She's sick. I can cover a part of it for now." Prakash turned, narrowing his eyes. "And who are you, the new charity boy?" Arjun kept his tone calm, "Just someone who knows what it's like to struggle." The old woman looked at him with tears of gratitude, and in that moment Arjun realized something: helping others felt far richer than anything he'd ever bought. From that day on, the tenants began trusting him. They came to him for advice, for help fixing broken things, for sharing tea on cold evenings. Slowly, the boy who'd grown up in silence found a family among strangers. But his real challenge came in the form of Mira. She lived right next door. The first time they spoke, she was yelling at her younger brother, Rohan, for skipping school. Arjun had smiled at her frustration. It reminded him of his own mother before she passed away. Later that evening, he found her sitting on the building's terrace staring at the city lights. "Hard day?" he asked gently. She turned to him, eyes tired but warm. "Every day's hard when you're poor, but we survive somehow." That line hit him like a blade. She didn't say it with anger, just truth. As days turned into weeks, they grew close. Mira's kindness wasn't loud, it was quiet, patient, and real. She helped him find a part-time job at the cafe where she worked. They shared late-night talks over chai, and she told him about her dream of saving enough money to send Rohan to college. Arjun, for the first time, didn't feel like a landlord's son pretending to be poor. He felt like a man learning how to live. But the story was far from simple. One evening, as he returned from work, he saw Prakash arguing with Mira in the corridor. The collector's tone was harsh, his words cutting. "You're late again, I'm giving you 2 days, after that, eviction notice." Mira's voice trembled. "Please, I just need until Friday, I'll pay every rupee." Prakash sneered. "Friday, you said that last week." Arjun stepped in, his voice cold. "What's your problem, Prakash? She's doing her best." Prakash laughed. "You defending her now, maybe you should pay her rent too, hero." Without hesitation, Arjun pulled out the money he had, a week's worth of savings from his cafe job, and handed it over. "Here, consider it paid." Prakash's smirk faded. "You'll regret interfering, kid." As he left, Mira stared at Arjun in disbelief. "Why did you do that? You barely have enough for yourself." Arjun smiled softly. "Because you would have done the same for me." Something changed in her eyes that night, gratitude maybe, or something deeper. But behind the kindness, a storm was brewing. A week later, Mr. Rajiv Malhotra called his property manager. "This building's revenue is dropping, too many delayed rents. I want a full inspection next week." Arjun didn't know his father's men were coming, not yet. He was too busy living in the illusion of a life he was never meant to have. That weekend, Mira invited him for dinner, a simple meal of rice, dal, and laughter. It was the kind of warmth he'd never felt at home. When she said, "You're like family now," something inside him ached, because he knew one day this lie would break her trust. Late that night, he sat on the terrace looking at the stars hidden behind smog. He whispered to himself, "What happens when they find out who I am?" The next morning, the storm arrived. Cars pulled up outside the building, black SUVs, men in suits, and a man Arjun knew too well, his father's right-hand man, Mr. Khanna. Khanna barked orders as workers entered apartments, checking papers, nodding overdue rents. The tenants panicked. Children cried, fear rippled through the air like fire. Mira ran to Arjun, breathless. "They're saying we might lose our homes, I don't know what's happening." Arjun's heart raced. He knew this was his father's doing. He wanted to reveal the truth to stop it all, but if he did, his cover would be blown. Everything he'd built here, every connection, every genuine bond, would collapse. He stood frozen between two worlds, the one he was born into and the one he'd come to love. Khanna's men moved door to door, and when they reached Mira's apartment, she stood tall, refusing to beg. "We've paid most of what we owe, please give us time." Khanna scoffed, "Time doesn't pay bills." Arjun clenched his fists. He stepped forward and said, "Sir, please, just a few more days, everyone here is trying." Khanna turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Who are you to interfere, tenant or troublemaker?" Arjun hesitated, the weight of his secret pressed like a boulder on his chest. "I'm just someone who believes people deserve a chance." Khanna glared but moved on, muttering, "You'll regret this." That night the building was silent. The tenants gathered in the courtyard, worried and broken. Arjun stood among them, feeling the same fear, but for a different reason. Because soon his father would hear about the defiant tenant who dared to challenge Khanna. And when that happened, everything would unravel. In his mansion across town, Rajiv Malhotra read the report from Khanna, his face darkening. "A tenant named Arun Sharma has been interfering with collections. Find out who he is." The next morning, Arjun woke to the sound of knocks, loud, angry, relentless. He opened the door and there stood Khanna holding a file. His voice was sharp. "Mr. Malhotra wants to meet you, now." Arjun's blood ran cold, his secret was slipping. Mira stood at her doorway, watching with wide eyes. "Arun, what's going on?" He forced a smile. "Just something I need to take care of." As he followed Kana to the black car waiting outside, the tenants whispered, confusion and fear in their eyes. The ride felt endless. His father's mansion loomed ahead, a world he had left behind now calling him back. Inside, Rajiv sat behind his massive mahogany desk, the air thick with authority. He didn't look up immediately. "So, Mr. Arun Sharma," he said with a cold smile, "you've been quite busy at my building." Arjun stayed silent. Rajiv finally looked up, his eyes sharp, assessing. "Or should I say, Arjun Malhotra?" The word sliced through the air like a blade. Arjun's heart stopped, the truth was out. Rajiv stood, circling his son. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess you've created, pretending to be poor, living among tenants, defying my staff?" Arjun's voice trembled, but his gaze was steady. "I wanted to see how they live, how your system treats them." Rajiv laughed bitterly. "My system, that system feeds you, Arjun, gives you everything you have." Arjun stepped closer. "Then maybe that's the problem, father, you give money, not respect." Rajiv's jaw tightened. "Enough, you're coming back home, no more of this nonsense." Arjun's voice broke. "You don't understand, they're good people, they deserve kindness, you can't just throw them out like trash." Rajiv slammed his fist on the table. "You are my son, not some hero of the poor, do you understand me?" Arjun stood still, eyes glistening. "Maybe being your son isn't what I want anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Rajiv turned away, fury trembling in his voice. "Get out of my sight." Arjun walked out, his heart heavy but his resolve stronger than ever. That night he returned to the building, unsure if he still belonged. But as he walked through the dim corridor, Mira stepped out. Her eyes searched his. "Who are you really?" He took a deep breath. "The landlord's son." The words fell like thunder in the quiet night. She stared at him, shock and betrayal in her gaze. "You lied to us." "I had to," he whispered. "I wanted to understand, to change things." Tears welled in her eyes. "We trusted you, Arjun, I trusted you." He tried to reach out, but she stepped back. "Leave us alone, you're just like the rest." And as she closed her door, the echo of it shattered something deep inside him. Arjun stood in the corridor, alone, caught between guilt and determination. Because though the truth had destroyed everything he'd built, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of his fight to change his father's world and to earn back the trust of those he had deceived. The night swallowed him whole. The rain returned, soft but relentless, as if the sky itself mourned for him. Arjun stood under the flickering corridor light, his mind spinning with Mira's words. "You're just like the rest." Those words hurt more than his father's anger ever could. He walked out into the street, the drizzle soaking through his shirt, each drop whispering his failure. He had wanted to prove that kindness could exist without wealth, but all he had managed was betrayal. As he reached the corner of the street, he looked back at the building. The windows glowed faintly, hiding lives he had grown to care about. He had come there to learn about humanity. Instead, he had learned how fragile trust could be. For the next few days, Arjun didn't go home. He stayed in a cheap lodge near the station, staring at the ceiling, unable to eat, unable to think straight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mira's face, the disappointment in her eyes, the disbelief. But then something happened that pulled him out of his guilt. On the fifth morning, he received a call from one of the tenants, Rafik. His voice was trembling. "Arjun, no, sorry sir, something's happening. The building, they're sending eviction notices to everyone. We have only 7 days. Arjun's heart dropped. "What, why?" "They said the landlord wants to demolish it, build a luxury tower." Arjun froze. He knew immediately who was behind it, his father. He hung up and stared blankly ahead. This wasn't just about his experiment anymore. It was about people's homes, their lives, their dignity. He stood up, grabbed his jacket and left. By the time he reached the building, chaos had erupted. People were shouting in the courtyard, some crying, others pleading with Kana's men. Boxes lay scattered, belongings thrown out like trash. Mira stood in the middle of it all, clutching Rohan's hand, her face pale but fierce. "You can't do this, we have nowhere to go." Kana smirked. "Orders from the owner, you've got a week." Arjun stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. "Tell my father I'll see him myself." Kana turned, startled. "You shouldn't even be here, you've caused enough trouble already." "Maybe," Arjun said, "but I'm not done yet." Mira's eyes met his, confusion and anger colliding. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but he simply said, "Trust me one last time." She looked away. "Trust, you broke it once, why should I again?" "Because this time," he said quietly, "I'm not pretending." That evening, Arjun walked into his father's office unannounced. The room was as cold as ever, marble floors, glass walls, and a man who ruled everything within sight. Rajiv looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "I thought I told you to stay out of this matter." "You're destroying their homes," Arjun said sharply. "For what? Another luxury tower no one needs." Rajiv leaned back amused. "Business, Arjun, sentiment doesn't pay bills." Arjun stepped closer, his voice rising. "Their families, you can't just erase them because it's profitable." Rajiv's expression hardened. "You sound like a naive child. Those tenants signed contracts, they knew the risks. Don't confuse pity with wisdom." Arjun's fists clenched. "This isn't about contracts, it's about decency." Rajiv's tone turned icy. "You forget who built this empire. I did it by being ruthless when necessary. If you can't stomach that, you don't belong in this business." "I don't want your business," Arjun said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I want to build something different, something human." Rajiv laughed bitterly. "Then you'll do it without my name, my money, or my protection." Arjun stared at him for a long moment, the man who had given him everything but love. Then he said quietly, "Fine, maybe that's exactly what I need." He walked out, leaving behind the empire that had never felt like home. That night he returned to the tenants. The eviction notices were still being distributed. The building's air was thick with fear and helplessness. Arjun gathered them in the courtyard. Everyone fell silent when they saw him. He took a deep breath. "I know you have every reason to hate me. I lied to you, I hid who I was, and because of that this is happening, but I promise you I'm going to make it right." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some were skeptical, some hopeful. Mira crossed her arms, her voice steady but cold. "You can't undo what your father's done." "No," he said, "but I can fight it." "How?" Rafik asked, his one leg trembling slightly as he leaned on his crutch. "He owns everything." Arjun's eyes burned with quiet fire. "Then I'll stop being his son and start being his rival." He spent the next days gathering information. He met lawyers, checked property documents, and learned the legal loopholes his father's company was exploiting. He discovered that the demolition permit hadn't been finalized yet, there was still time. He also found something else. A series of unapproved financial records that showed his father's company had cut corners and violated tenant protection laws. Arjun knew what he had to do. He went to a local journalist, a woman named Kavya who had once exposed a major real estate scam. He told her everything, who he was, what he'd done, what his father was planning. Kavya listened silently, then said, "You realize this could destroy your family's reputation forever." Arjun nodded. "Maybe that's the only way to save someone else's home." Within 48 hours, the story broke. Landlord's empire accused of illegal evictions, insider exposes truth. It spread like wildfire, TV channels ran with it, social media erupted with outrage. Reporters camped outside the Malhotra mansion demanding statements. For the first time in years, Rajiv Malhotra's empire trembled. Inside the old apartment building, tenants watched the news in disbelief. The man they had once called a liar was now their voice. Mira stood quietly at the back, her eyes glistening. That evening, Arjun returned. As he entered the courtyard, everyone looked at him differently, some in awe, some still cautious. Children ran up to him, holding his hand, whispering, "You saved our home, Baya." He smiled faintly. "Not yet, but we're close." Mira approached him slowly. The setting sun painted her face in gold and sorrow. "You really did it," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." She hesitated. "I was wrong about you." He shook his head. "No, you were right. I lied, I hurt you, but I'm trying to be the man I should have been from the start." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mira said, "We still might lose the building. What if your father finds a way?" "He will," Arjun admitted, "but this time he's not fighting tenants, he's fighting me." And he meant it. Days turned into weeks. The case gained attention. Protests erupted outside the Malhotra offices. Government inspectors began investigating the building's records. Rajiv tried everything: lawyers, bribes, influence, but the pressure kept growing. His son's betrayal had gone public, and every attempt to silence him only made Arjun more determined. Then one night Rajiv called him. His voice was tired, almost hollow. "Come home, we need to talk." Arjun hesitated but agreed. When he entered the mansion, the place felt emptier than ever. His father sat alone in the study, the lights dim. Rajiv looked up, eyes bloodshot. "You've ruined me." Arjun stood silently. "I built everything from nothing," Rajiv continued, "and you threw it away for what? Some poor tenants." "They're not some poor tenants," Arjun said quietly. "They're people who trusted us with their lives, and you forgot what that means." Rajiv's voice broke slightly. "Do you think the world cares about trust? It cares about power." Arjun shook his head. "Then I'll build a world that cares about something better." For a long time Rajiv just stared at him, then he said, "You sound like your mother." Arjun froze. "You never talk about her." "She was the only one who could make me doubt myself," Rajiv said softly. "Maybe she would have been proud of you." It was the first time his father had shown anything close to vulnerability. Arjun wanted to speak, but Rajiv stood, straightened his coat and said, "I can't stop the investigation now. It's too public, but I'll withdraw the demolition request." Arjun's eyes widened. "You'll what?" Rajiv sighed. "Consider it your victory, but this doesn't make you right." "It's not about winning," Arjun said. "It's about doing what's right." His father didn't answer, he just turned away. The next day, official confirmation came. The demolition was cancelled. The building would remain and the tenants could stay. The news spread like fire through the hallways. People cheered, laughed, even cried. Rafik banged his crutch on the floor, shouting, "Arjun Bhaiya did it." Children danced in the courtyard, and even the old lady whose rent he had once paid wept with joy. Arjun watched it all quietly, a faint smile on his lips. For the first time he felt peace. Then he saw Mira standing near the staircase watching him. He walked over, heart pounding. She smiled gently. "You really changed everything." "No," he said, "we all did." For a moment silence wrapped around them, then Mira said, "You could go back to your world now, why stay here?" He looked around, the cracked walls, the peeling paint, the people laughing despite it all. "Because this is the first place I ever felt alive." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe you finally found your home." But just as warmth began to return between them, a dark shadow loomed again. That night, Arjun received a call from an unknown number. A voice on the other end whispered, "You think you've won? You've made enemies, boy, powerful ones, you'll regret this." Before he could respond, the line went dead. He stood by the window, staring at the street below, unease curling in his chest. The city looked calm, but he knew storms often hid behind silence. As dawn broke, Mira found him sitting on the stairs, lost in thought. "Another sleepless night?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Something coming, I can feel it." She sat beside him. "Then whatever it is, we'll face it together." He turned to her, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Together." "Together," she said firmly. He wanted to believe that. But deep down he knew when you challenge power, it doesn't fade quietly, it strikes back. And the next strike was closer than anyone imagined. The next morning began with an uneasy calm. The city was waking up, but something about the air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Arjun sat on the building's terrace, watching the early rays of sun creep between the towers. For a brief moment everything seemed peaceful, but peace in his world never lasted long. By noon, two black cars stopped outside the building. Men in formal suits stepped out, flashing IDs that bore the logo of the municipal authority. Their leader, a stern-faced officer, shouted, "Everyone stay inside, we're conducting an inspection." Tenants peeked nervously through half-open doors. Arjun descended the stairs and approached the officer. "What's going on?" The man looked him over coldly. "We received a complaint, safety violations. This building isn't fit for habitation, it's going to be sealed." Arjun's chest tightened. "That's impossible, the permits were cleared last month." The officer shrugged. "Not anymore, someone filed new reports, you'll all have to vacate within 24 hours. Behind him, Mira gasped, "No, please, this can't be happening again." Arjun turned to her, his mind racing. He knew this wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation. Someone from his father's circle was trying to undo everything he had fought for. He stepped closer to the officer who filed this complaint. The man met his eyes but said nothing. Then, almost under his breath, he murmured, "Ask your father's old partners." Arjun felt his stomach drop. His father might have withdrawn the demolition order, but the businessmen who had invested in the luxury project weren't going to let it go that easily. Too much money was on the line. The next hours were chaos. Tenants ran around, gathering documents, fearing eviction again. Children cried. Mira tried to calm everyone, but her voice trembled too. Arjun felt helpless for the first time since this all began. Every move he made seemed to trigger another attack. That night he called his father again. Rajiv answered after a long pause. His tone was weary. "What do you want now, Arjun?" "Did you know about this?" Arjun demanded. "The municipal raid, the fake complaint." Rajiv sighed. "No, but I'm not surprised. You embarrassed powerful people, son. You think they'll just forgive and forget. So you'll just let them ruin innocent lives?" Arjun's voice cracked. "I can't fight everyone," Rajiv said quietly. "You chose this path, now walk it." The line went dead. Arjun stood in silence, the phone trembling in his hand. For a long time he said nothing. Then, slowly, his eyes hardened. "If I started this fight," he whispered, "I'll finish it." He spent the night searching through legal documents, old files, and news archives. Somewhere in the chaos, he found what he was looking for: a signed contract between his father's company and a private developer, one that violated several housing regulations. It was proof that the investor's actions were illegal. But getting that document into the right hands wouldn't be easy. At dawn, he met Kavya, the journalist, in a quiet cafe. She listened as he explained everything, showing her the papers. "If we publish this," she warned, "they'll come after you. They might even come after the tenants." "I know," he said, "but if we don't, they'll lose their homes anyway." She nodded slowly. "Then we do it carefully." By evening, the story broke again. Developers behind Malhotra properties caught in housing fraud. Leaked documents reveal illegal deals. This time, it wasn't just another scandal. It was an explosion. The city's authorities launched a full investigation. Arrest warrants were issued for 2 major investors, and for the first time, the tenants of the old building were declared protected residents under emergency housing rights. The fight was over, at least that's what everyone thought. That night, the building came alive with celebration. Someone brought sweets. Rafik played old songs from his phone. Even the children danced under the yellow bulbs hanging in the courtyard. Arjun stood to the side, watching, exhausted but happy. Mira walked up to him, smiling softly. "You did it again." He laughed quietly. "No, we did." She looked at him for a long moment. "You really meant it, didn't you, when you said you wanted to change things?" "I meant every word." The silence between them was tender now, not broken like before. She took a step closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe you were pretending. You looked so lost when you came here." "Maybe I wasn't pretending," he said, his eyes gentle. "Maybe I really was lost." Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the street, a sound like metal hitting concrete. Everyone turned. Smoke began rising from the entrance. Someone had thrown a small firebomb near the gate. Flames licked the walls, panic erupted, and people screamed. "Get the kids out!" Arjun shouted. He and Rafik grabbed buckets, throwing water toward the fire. Mira rushed to guide the children downstairs. Within minutes, the blaze was under control, but fear still burned in everyone's eyes. Arjun stood amid the smoke, his lungs aching, his face smeared with ash. He knew what this was: a warning. The developers, desperate and humiliated, had decided to scare them back into silence. Later, when the police arrived, Mira found him leaning against the wall, coughing softly. "You could have been killed," she said, tears in her eyes. He smiled faintly. "I've been afraid of a lot of things in my life, Mira, but not this, not anymore." She reached out, gently brushing the soot from his cheek. "You don't have to fight alone." He looked at her, eyes tired but full of gratitude. "I know, because now I finally have something worth fighting for." Days passed, investigations deepened. The developers were arrested, their assets frozen. The city hailed Arjun as a whistleblower, a hero who exposed corruption from within. But Arjun didn't care about fame. He cared about the people in that building, people who had shown him more humanity than he'd ever seen in his mansion. One evening, as he walked through the courtyard, he found Mira painting the old wall near the entrance. "What are you doing?" he asked with a smile. "Making it beautiful again," she said. "We've lived with cracks for too long, time to fix them." He smiled. "Maybe we both needed fixing." She laughed softly. "Maybe." They worked side by side until the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city gold. As the first stars appeared, Mira looked at him and said quietly, "You know, this place feels different now. Not just the walls, the people, everything." "It's because they finally have hope," he said. "And you," she asked, "do you have hope too?" He thought for a moment. "I think I finally do." But even as he said it, he knew his journey wasn't over. There was still something left to face: his father. A week later, Rajiv called again. His tone was softer this time. "Arjun, I want to see you." When Arjun arrived at the mansion, he found his father standing in the garden, not in his office for once. The older man looked older, the lines on his face deeper, his arrogance dulled. "You were right," Rajiv said quietly. "I lost sight of what mattered. I thought power meant control, but maybe it means responsibility." Arjun was silent, unsure how to respond. Rajiv turned to him. "You've done what I never could. You earned respect without money. That's something I can't buy." The words hit Arjun harder than he expected. "Father." Rajiv looked away. "If you still want to change things, maybe I can help this time, not as your enemy but as your ally." For the first time in years, Arjun saw his father not as the cold landlord, but as a man finally willing to understand. He nodded slowly. "Let's start with that one building, turn it into something better." Rajiv smiled faintly. "A housing foundation maybe, for families who can't afford rent." Arjun's heart lifted. "Yes, in mother's name." For a moment the air between them was filled with quiet peace, fragile but real. That night Arjun returned home, not to the mansion but to the old building, where laughter still echoed and dreams still survived. Mira was waiting near the stairs, holding 2 cups of tea. "How did it go?" she asked softly. He smiled. "For the first time it went right." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing. "Then maybe now it's time to start living, not just fighting." He looked at her, the glow of the lights reflecting in her eyes. "Maybe that's exactly what I want." The city hummed quietly around them, millions of stories unfolding in the night, but for Arjun it all faded away. Because for the first time he wasn't pretending to be poor or trying to prove something. He was simply himself, human, flawed, but finally free. And yet, somewhere in the distance, a shadow still lingered, a reminder that peace was never permanent. A black car parked across the street. A man inside made a call. "He's becoming too popular, the others want him silenced." The line crackled and a voice replied coldly, "Then make it happen." The car drove off, disappearing into the city lights. Arjun, standing on the terrace with Mira, had no idea that his story wasn't ending, it was only turning darker. The night was quieter than usual, too quiet for a city that never slept. Arjun leaned on the railing of the terrace, the cool breeze brushing against his face. Below him, laughter floated up from the courtyard, children playing, families talking, life returning to normal. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe. But somewhere beyond that peace, danger was moving closer. He didn't notice the black car that stopped across the street again, or the man who stepped out, his expression cold, his purpose clear. Downstairs, Mira was helping Rohan with his homework. She smiled as she saw Arjun walk past the corridor. "Hey," she called, "tea getting cold." He turned and smiled faintly. "I'll be right there." He didn't make it. As he stepped out toward the gate, a sharp sound cracked through the air, a gunshot. Panic erupted instantly. People screamed, running for cover. The world blurred for Arjun as pain tore through his shoulder. He stumbled, clutching the wound, falling to his knees. Mira's voice cut through the chaos. "Arjun!" She ran toward him, ignoring the shouts, the danger. She fell beside him, blood soaking through his shirt. "No, no, stay with me." He tried to speak, his breath shallow. "Mira, run." "Not without you," she cried. The shooter vanished into the dark streets before anyone could see his face. Neighbors rushed out, calling for help. Someone phoned an ambulance. The sirens echoed minutes later, slicing through the night. As they carried him away, Mira held his hand, refusing to let go. Hours later in the hospital, the steady beep of the monitor filled the silence. The doctors worked quickly, removing the bullet, patching the wound. He had lost a lot of blood, but he was alive. Barely. When Arjun opened his eyes, the world was pale and quiet. Mira sat beside him, her eyes swollen from crying, her hand still wrapped around his. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You scared everyone." He smiled weakly. "I seem to have a habit of doing that." Tears slipped down her cheek. "You almost died, Arjun." "I promised you I'd fight for what's right," he murmured. "Guess I just didn't say how far I'd go." She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. "You're impossible." The news spread quickly. Whistleblower Arjun Malhotra survives attack. The city buzzed with outrage. Protests erupted, demanding justice. The police traced the attack back to one of the corrupt developers still hiding assets. Arrests followed within days. But none of it mattered to Arjun. What mattered was that he had survived not just the bullet but the storm that had followed his truth. When he was discharged, the tenants welcomed him back like a hero. The building, once a place of fear, now stood as a symbol of unity. Walls were repainted, broken things fixed. And for the first time, it felt like home to everyone, not just a place to survive. Rajiv came one evening quietly without his usual entourage. The tenants fell silent as he entered. For a moment he looked unsure, a powerful man suddenly small among the people he had once ignored. He walked to his son and said softly, "You did what I couldn't, you gave them dignity." Arjun's eyes softened. "You can still do the same." Rajiv nodded. "I want to. I've set up the foundation, the Malhotra Housing Trust. Your mother's name is on it." The crowd broke into applause. Mira wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. Rajiv looked around, seeing the faces that once feared him now filled with cautious hope. "I may never undo the past," he said, "but I can start again, because my son reminded me that people aren't just numbers." Arjun placed a hand on his father's shoulder. For the first time, the distance between them felt small. Days passed into weeks. The foundation began rebuilding other rundown buildings across the city. Arjun worked day and night not for profit but for purpose. Mira stood beside him through it all, helping, organizing, caring. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the same terrace where everything had begun, Mira said quietly, "Do you ever miss your old life?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes the comfort maybe, but not the emptiness." She smiled. "You really changed everything." He shook his head. "No, they changed me." The wind blew softly between them. The city lights flickered on one by one, glowing like scattered stars. Then Mira said, almost in a whisper, "You know. The night you got shot, I thought I lost you, and I realized something." He turned to her. "What?" She met his gaze, her eyes shimmering. "That I couldn't lose you, not now, not ever." For a moment, words failed him, then he took her hand gently. "You won't." And in that quiet space, surrounded by the sounds of laughter, life, and hope, their hands tightened together. No promises, no grand declarations, just something real. Months later, the foundation held its first major event, the inauguration of a new affordable housing complex. Cameras flashed, people cheered, but Arjun stood at the back, watching as families received their new keys. Children ran through the corridors of homes built not for profit but for people. Rajiv stood beside him, smiling. "You did good, son." Arjun looked at him, then at the people celebrating. "We did good." As the ceremony ended, Mira walked up, handing him a garland of flowers. For the man who pretended to be poor and ended up making everyone rich in kindness. He laughed softly. "That's a terrible title." She grinned. "Maybe, but it's true." The crowd applauded as the ribbon was cut. The flashbulbs captured the moment, the landlord's son who had once been a stranger among tenants, now standing as one of them. Later, when the celebration quieted, Arjun stood alone for a moment, looking at the skyline. The same city that once felt cruel now shimmered with something else, compassion. He whispered to himself, "Maybe this was what I was meant to find all along." Mira came up behind him, resting her hand on his arm. "What are you thinking about?" He smiled. "How sometimes, to understand the world, you have to lose everything first." "And did you?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his heart full. "I lost the life I had, but I found the life I needed." The night stretched over the city, filled with stories, laughter, and the hum of dreams rebuilt from ashes. And somewhere deep inside that light and shadow, Arjun finally understood the truth his mother once told him. The value of a home isn't in its walls, it's in the hearts it shelters. As he looked at Mira and the families around him, he smiled, because now he wasn't pretending anymore. He was home,